You must remember this, a kiss is still a kiss, a sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say I love you, on that you can rely. No matter what the future brings as time goes by.
I'm talking today with Don Webb. Don is a broadcast veteran. I'm speaking with him at Good Shepherd Village in Endwell. And I want to thank you very much, Don, for letting me share your life with people.
It's a pleasure to be here. It really is. I was honored a couple of weeks ago by being selected into the Binghamton Broadcasters Hall of Fame, and I had one of the greatest days of my life telling bad jokes and things of that nature, and seeing some of the great old veterans of this town. Bill Parker looks great, Dave Mitchell looking tremendous, Phil Jacobs. It was just a great day to be around. I started out, I was born in Buffalo, New York, brought up in Kenmore, New York, a suburb, and the 50s, I think, were one of the greatest times to grow up. It was still innocent. I remember the headlines in the Buffalo Evening News, Robert Mitchum arrested for marijuana. It was a headline. Now, they don't even mention it. It was an innocent time and a fun time. But from there I went to college, which was almost like Animal House. We would do all kinds of crazy things. I majored in broadcasting.
Where did you go?
I went to Ithaca College, and at that time it was a poor man's school. It no longer is such, but like everything else, everything has risen in cost. But it was great training. At first I said I just want to be an announcer, and that's where I ended up. But we also learned about sales, production, writing, and the courses I took, which at the time I thought were useless, like history of the theater. You can always refer to that, the proscenium arch and everything of that nature. But it was a very interesting thing. But from there, of course, I had my first radio job.
And ask when you graduated from Ithaca. When was that?
I graduated in 1960. That was like 53 years ago.
And a degree in?
Broadcasting.
Okay.
Went to work for WKRT. In my senior year, I worked over at WKRT in Cortland full time while I was still going to school. I arranged my classes accordingly. And had a lot of fun because there were 7 girls for every guy in Cortland. It was a great time to be a disc jockey. And the beers were only 10 cents a piece. So it was, it was a beautiful combination of ingredients. But I got that fatal notice one time when I took a trip up to Buffalo to visit my parents, and with 2 of my buddies came back with me. They had come from Buffalo to pick me up, and my mother greeted us in the driveway and said, "Hi Jane, hi Jack, greetings soldier." That was it. I got my draft notice in the mail, and Uncle Sam took me in. I don't know why, but I had an uncle, 2 uncles. One was a colonel, one was a general, retired. And one thing they said was, they can make you do just about anything they want, but they can't make you like it. And if you go in with a chip on your shoulder, you're going to be miserable for 2 years. So I took the advice. I lasted my 2 years. I had the opportunity to teach propaganda theory and rumors and I even taught a class in religion. I didn't know anything about it, but the guy was on vacation, on leave. I had to do that. But it was it was a psychological warfare school.
So that was your MOS?
No, my MOS was broadcast specialist. I used to do radio programs at noontime over the loudspeakers in the mess hall. And play around sometime. We would say, congratulations, and a 3-day pass go out to Sergeant Gukowitz, who displayed great Army tradition, and the guys in the mess hall were saying, he's a screw-up. Why did they do? They totally lied, about everything. But we had a lot of fun. It had some interesting experiences, which I won't go into. But almost drowned. I will tell you that story. I'm not a swimmer, okay? I almost drowned when I was a kid also, but we were in the ocean outside of Myrtle Beach, and there was a pier there, Johnny Mercer's Pier, because Johnny Mercer had a bar and a restaurant at the end of the pier. So my buddy and I were walking along out in the water. Neither one of us could swim, and we're out there, and we're out to water up to our chest. Now you're in the ocean, and that's a very unpredictable lady. All of a sudden, this big wave was coming at us. I never finished the sentence. I said, that's an indicate. I never got the shun out because we were swept. We didn't realize we were on a sandbar. And I got swept off the sandbar, and so did my buddy Jim. Now, all of a sudden, my first thought was, I gotta help Jim. Now I go over and grab him, because I knew he couldn't swim. I grabbed him, and I suddenly realized, you idiot, you can't swim. So I said, I'll meet you at the shore, Jim, being a true coward. So I wended my way, like dog paddled my way to one of the pillars that held up the pier. And I went from pillar to pillar to pillar to pillar until I got to short water. Broke away from the last pillar, and I'm a bloody mess. The barnacles had cut me up. All my arms and my chest were all little tiny trickles of blood. Now I'm thinking, uh-oh, what about Jim? I turn around, and he's there looking like a whale. He had grabbed a hold of a fisherman's line, and the guy was towing him into shore. The Army had many experiences. I won't go into them anymore, but it was just such a ridiculous story. From the Army, I started working in the Richmond-Petersburg market, having first at WPVA and then WSSV. And I learned everything there because I was the morning man at WSSV. I went out and sold the rest of the day, and then at night I would do play-by-play sports. 2 games a week in basketball and 1 or 2 games in football. And probably one of the most terrible experiences I had was I was doing the football games, and it was a night game, and it was the day Kennedy was shot. I was doing fine. I said, they're going to, commemorate President Kennedy. Everything was fine until they blew taps, and I wept. It was one of the toughest things I've had to go through. I got my composure back, and everything was all right, but it was just one of those things that you don't want to experience. But everybody said, you know what, you sounded real. I said, well, those weren't fake tears. It was a great experience there. But learning to sell, learning to deal with customers is very important in the total aspect of broadcasting. Announcing is just one tiny part of it. But from there, I had the opportunity to come up back to New York State at WINR, radio and TV at the time.
How did that come about?
I saw an ad in Broadcasting Magazine, which was the Bible at that time, and answered it, and they sent them a tape, and they said, come on up, you're in. So I started working, and Sam Page was there, who was in the Hall of Fame also. Jim Sturgis, who ran Sturgis Electric for many, he was the morning man, and I was the afternoon guy. And had a lot of fun, because I didn't have to go to work till 11 o'clock in the morning, so I could stay up late at night, and it was fun. Well, that continued on for a number of years, 3.5, 4 years. I eventually became the morning man because Sturgis went to form his own business. But I was doing the morning show and suddenly realized, gee, I'm not making enough money. I am not making enough. And it was, at the time, it was about 13 grand, and that was good money in 1965, or 66. But finally, I applied for a job at the Columbia School of Broadcasting in New York City, and they hired me as auditions director, which wasn't what I thought. I mean, we did conduct auditions, but we were salesmen, because we had to sign people up for the school, and you got paid on commission only. So you became a salesman about it. And I would always do a talk to the incoming potential students before they took their audition. And the one thing I always told them, I said, one of the greatest things to have is confidence. But confidence is no good unless you have the ability to do something. So you can have all the confidence in the world that you can fly. But when you jump off the Empire State Building, you better be able to fly or you're going to be a spot on the sidewalk. And I tried to make them understand. They all came in saying, I'm going to be a great guy, great guy, great guy. But I tried to let them understand that it's a tough racket. But it was an enjoyable experience. Again, I had an opportunity to make voiceovers on a couple of movies. I did some books for the blind with Fritz Weaver, who was an actor, very good actor. And that was a great experience. I made a movie about a girl who walked around New York City listening to all news radio stations. And my buddy and I would go up to the Dakota where John Lennon was shot. The girl who was producing the film had an apartment there, and she had a studio rigged up. So we went over there and we would record news stories for 2-3 hours. News stories. She supplied all the news stories. Well, she cleverly did this so that the news stories regulated themselves within the concept of what this girl was doing in New York City. I never saw the film. The world premiere was in the Village. You know, it was not a big time film. World premiere was in the Village, and I was working that night, so I didn't, and I never saw it again. You know, I don't even, maybe it went to TV, I doubt it, but it probably went just to slides. You know, it was not a big time thing, but it was an experience.
Now, when you were at the Columbia School of Broadcasting, do you recall that you had any big stars that turned out to be big stars?
I don't know, because I lost track of them. I was only there for 2 or 3 years, and it takes time to become a big star. I did enroll one of the former, the guys who sang Under the Boardwalk, and I can't think of the name of the group now, but his name was Dan Dougherty, and I enrolled him, and I had one young guy who was a broadcast fanatic, and he's kept in touch with me over the years, and he's general manager of a couple of radio stations now, and has succeeded tremendously in broadcasting, so which always makes you feel good. I came back, when I came back here, I started coaching football in the Vestal Youth Football League, which was a tremendous experience, because one of the things you try to do is develop character. Teaching football is one thing, playing football another, but you have to teach character. And I was blessed with having as assistant coaches Bill Lawler, who's Director of Emergency Services for UHS. He was a registered nurse also, so in case anybody got hurt, he was right there. And Tony Palucci, who was a former Binghamton High School player in TC Jet and was in the Minor League Hall of Fame. More importantly, he knew how to deal with kids. And we had a lot of fun. We won some championships. 33 years I was there. And finally I went over and started coaching school ball at Johnson City for 4 years. And I ended up with the varsity coaching staff at Seton. But those were great years. I finally got heat stroke one summer, and I couldn't coach anymore because all of your coaching is basically done in August when in prepping for the season. I couldn't be out in the sun. So I regretfully had to give it up, but it were beautiful experiences, and now I come back and I meet some of the kids. I don't recognize them because, you know, I said, gee, Jimmy, you didn't weigh 220 pounds when you played for me, and you didn't have a mustache, you know. But those were the fun things about it. It's a great experience in life, but from INR, I think.
Now, did you do, excuse me, did you do television at INR also?
Yeah, I did the weather. I was the worst weatherman possible. I told you the story a few minutes ago. My very first time on the air, I was a nervous wreck. And they had a outline of the United States, and you used to draw in H for high, L for low, and you got the script. And I said, "Hi, I'm Don Webb with weather. Let's take a look at the board." I turned around, and they're doing a close-up of the board, and I'm going on and on and on about the weather, low pressure and high pressure and all this stuff. I finally turned around, and the guy goes, "This," which means commercial break. So I said, "We'll break now for a commercial, we'll be right back." The guy says, "You got 15 seconds for the local weather." I said, "Oh God." So I learned a lesson out of that, but it was a lot of fun. Great people to work with.
Who were some of the other people on television with you at that?
Well, Walt Adams, a guy named Ron Baker, who ended up at KNEW, which is a great radio station, part of the Metro Media chain in Oakland, California, and also went on TV there. I used to do the San Francisco Giants games and stuff on radio. Sam Page, broadcast Hall of Famer, and a very interesting man who had the divinity thing. He was a minister at one time also, and he married John Gary and his wife down in New Orleans when Sam was in New Orleans. So, and John Gary had worked up in Binghamton for a while at what was WNBF, and he became a tenor who was on TV a lot, what have you. But good people to work, Jim Ashbury and a couple of others. Pete Van Wern, of course, was the guy who soared to success, and I just ran into Pete. He came up to visit me, and I was 42 years it's been, and we had 2 hours of conversation and laughs. But he was the announcer for the Atlanta Braves for 33 years before he retired, and he was seen all over the country because TBS was owned by Ted Turner, and his network covered everywhere. So he was seen all across the country. So it was a tremendous exposure for him. He told me that he had a little cancer. He took it off and it came back. And they said, "We're going to give you a stronger dose. You're going to lose your hair." And he said, "There isn't much to lose. Go on." But he had a great sense of humor. And he was back here because he was elected into the Binghamton Broadcasters Baseball Hall of Fame. Binghamton triplets he was doing, and he never did the Mets. He was gone by then. He went from here to Toledo to Tidewater to Atlanta and had a brilliant career. But I just, you associate with so many different people. Somebody asked me, "Did you ever interview anybody important?" I said, Alan Alda. I said, at the Vestal Plaza, at the old Home Dairy. Sam Parisi owned it then. And I used to do a show from 1 to 2 at the Vestal Plaza at various locations. I'd plug it in and I'd be back on the air. And Alan Alda came in, and this was in 1968, I believe, and it was an election year, and he was campaigning for Hubert Humphrey. So the manager said, "Look, this is not a political show. Avoid talking politics with him. Stick to his career." Well, of course, I got off on a bad note right away by saying, "How's your dad doing?" His dad was Robert Alda, who starred in, I just saw a movie yesterday, The Gershwin Story. He played George Gershwin. And he was, I think, one of the original stars of Guys and Dolls, or Pal Joey, one of those two. Well, this did not set well with Alan, because Alan had an ego. Well, we got through somehow the interview without him getting into any depth about the Democratic candidate. But he left and shook hands. He says, "Nice bout." So that was it for him. I also interviewed Dolly Parton, Johnny Mathis, and a lot of sports figures, a lot of sports. The biggest one was Wilt Chamberlain. Well, what do you, oh my God, he was a huge man. He was 290 pounds, 7'1", and just a giant. But at the time, Syracuse had a basketball team in the NBA, the Syracuse Nationals, and the All-Star game was played in Syracuse, so I got to interview a number of the All-Stars. And he was my favorite because it was just so unique talking to him.
Now, this is when you had the afternoon show on...
I know, this was when I was at WKRT.
Oh, WKRT.
Yeah. I got the opportunity to go up there. Later on, I had the opportunity to interview Jack Nicklaus, who was a very interesting man. He was doing an exhibition out toward Rochester, in a golf course outside of Rochester. And after he got through, I got to interview him, and that was an interesting. I like celebrities. I'm in awe of them, just like anybody else. So it was, the broadcast business is a varied thing. And when I got into sales, when I came back from New York, I started selling for what was then WNBF TV, converted into BNG.
Now, when was that?
Gosh, 71, I think. I worked there for about 11 years, and I took the job as sales manager of WMRV and WENE, and was there a number of years. And then I left there. The new owners came in, and Mrs. Griffin was gone, and new owners came in, and they wanted their own person there. So okay, so I went to WHWK and became sales manager there. And then from that, I was a series of other stations. I finally said, the heck with this. All these stations get sold, and I'm losing my job. So I went back to WICZ, which used to be INR. Took a job as a salesman there. Enjoyed myself. I was 60 years old. What the heck? When I turned 65, they said, "Gee, Don, would you like to go part-time?" I said, "Well, what does that mean?" "Well, we're going to have to give up a lot of your accounts because we're hiring 2 new salesmen." I said, "Oh, no, we'll give you good accounts." And they gave me such things as Van Cott and Miller and, some good accounts. But you're only going to work from 8 to noon and you have full bennies. Oh, I'm in. Because I was getting Social Security then. I was 65. I stayed there till last year when I had a couple of injuries, some accidents, and lost the use of my right arm, and started having to wear a catheter, and everything went at once.
Makes it tough to be on the road.
Well, as I said at the inauguration of the Binghamton Broadcasters Hall of Fame, I said, "I'm harmless, ladies. I wear a catheter." I said, "That's like shooting pool with a rope." And it got a good laugh. It's a good one-liner. But I lasted there until last year, and then was in the hospital. I didn't even know I was near death, but that's happened. My doctor later told me, he says, "We thought we were going to lose you." I said, "Gee, thanks," But I never felt ill or anything. I had a kidney infection, and I had, all kinds of different things go wrong. But my heart was good, my lungs were good, my blood pressure was good. I'm alive. I thank God for that. At one time I said, what am I going to do? Well, fortunately, I went from therapy to this, to that, to this, and had some relapses. But here I am at the Village in Endwell, loving it. I'm assisted because I can't tie my shoes, or I can't do things like that, button a shirt. And so I wear sweatshirts all the time, and t-shirts. The people here are great. I get served 3 meals a day. They take good care of me, and I'm a Vidian. I watch TV. That's my big thing.
I'd like to go back to your broadcast days. Which did you enjoy more, announcing or sales?
I have to admit I enjoyed announcing the most. I was a frustrated comic, and I used to love one-liners. I remember my mother-in-law used to listen to me, and she would get mad if I didn't make fun of her. So my favorite line of that was, "We're having my mother-in-law over for dinner tonight, having a special dinner in her honor, rump roast." Well, Her friends told her about that one, and she loved it. She's still alive, 93 years old, one of the nicest people I've ever met, and still drives her own car, lives alone, great lady, she's matriarch of the family. And my daughters, I lost one daughter, but my other daughter moved back here, and she goes over to see her grandmother periodically and comes here. She was living in Connecticut, and finally I get her now 2 or 3 times a week. And she brought over the boyfriend to me. Big occasion. Well, his brother, I used to coach his brother in football, so it turned out to be a very easygoing situation, which can be tense at times. And I never try to make it tense. I like to have a good time. But, you know, as an announcer, you satisfied your ego a lot.
Talk about, if you would, talk about some of your accounts when you were selling.
Well, when I was selling, as I said, I had Van Cott Jewelers, and I sort of inherited that because back in the 60s on TV, Ken Van Cott, the original owner, and I used to do a live TV commercial every Wednesday night. Now, in theory at least, it was 30 seconds. It never lasted 30 seconds. It was a minute, minute and a half. So Bobby Dunn, the director, would give us free leeway because you had to go into the news right at 6:30, NBC. So Ken and I would get out there. Ken, what do you want to talk about tonight? Well, Don, and he would bring a display out and everything. Well, he would go on and on and on, and it was you can't shut him up, you know. And God bless him, we always finished on time. We never went over and everything. And I'd say, well, that's a great thought for a gift and everything. Let's go blah, blah, blah. And we'd get right into the news. Then I inherited the account because they said, well, you used to handle Van Cott himself. And then, of course, when Levine's brought it, I handled the account. Herb Levine, great man. And his son now is running it, and we became very good friends. We talked about the Yankees. You know, salesmanship is not just telling you what I'm going to do. It's talking about the advantages of what your product is and trying to give a person an idea that can make them money. Not to make you money, make them money. You're selling commercials, which in turn sell the public. So I always had a good relationship with Bill Levine, and Steve Miller was one of my favorite people of all time. Always bought a car from him, which made him susceptible to my pitches. But we had a good TV station at the time, so what? But at one time, I used to do the Miller commercials on TV, and we finally dropped that concept, and he's using himself and Kenny, his brother, and the sons. So, which is very good. I always liked the line, Miller, our name means a great deal. Now that can go both ways. It means a great deal or a great deal, you know. But he finally dropped that and started doing his own stuff, and we always enjoyed a great relationship. I was the spokesman at his daughter's wedding reception and things like that. Good family situation. I enjoy those two guys immensely. My old buddy Rob Salamita. Salamita State Fair Speedy Sauce was another account that I had, and I rented from Rob. I rented over the factory, you know. In fact, I had a key to the factory, and thank goodness, because there was a fire after somebody left, and there was a fire down there. I put it out, so Rob was always thankful to me, and has remained my good friend. When I was in the hospital, he was taking care of a lot of the emergency situations because my daughter couldn't do it. She was living in Connecticut at the time. But thank God she's back here. Let me say a couple of things about my daughter. She is taking hold of all of my financial responsibilities. She has power of attorney, and she has done so many things. She said, well, I'm running in a 54-mile race. I said, you're running or driving? Running. Well, she came back, it was in Africa. She came back and she was fuming. I said, what's wrong? She said, well, at the end of 42 miles, they stopped me because I was 4 minutes over the minimum. So I couldn't finish the race. And she says, the only reason I went to Africa to do it was to say I completed it. I said, honey, 42 miles you ran? There maybe 1 in 20,000 people could run 42 miles. But she never felt that was an accomplishment. But she's been everywhere. She played with the Australian national team in soccer when she was living in Canberra. She went to San Francisco and coached soccer. She was in biogenesis. Her last job in Connecticut was doing a survey on beluga whales at the aquarium in Mystic, Connecticut. I said, you ever get in the water with them? She said, oh yeah, every day. She said, one gives me a kiss. I said, you're kidding. I said, I hope that's all the kisses you're getting. She's a great woman, because she's my baby, but she's a woman, you know, and a great woman. And I am so proud of her, and I guess you can tell the way I talk about her. But my life has been pretty interesting, I think.
Let me interrupt one more time, Don. Were you active in sports when you were young?
Yeah, when I was young, I played all sports in high school. I was football, basketball, baseball. I even got into a little hockey, just at a wading pool. They used to flood the bottom of it, and we'd play hockey at night. Love sports.
What about in college?
In college, I didn't. I broadcast sports in college.
That was on WTK.
Football, baseball. In fact, I did the first broadcast in the East Coast of a college baseball game. Ithaca was, I don't know who Ithaca was playing, but I was the announcer. It said, you're looking, they said hi on South Hill, you're looking at Ithaca, New York. Down below, to your right, is Cornell University. A little dig at the Big Red. And I said, this is Ithaca College Television. Well, we did the baseball games, had a great time doing that, and it was great exposure and experience for you. The one thing that I couldn't do very well is they said, do wrestling. College wrestling isn't like pro wrestling where you can make up names of holds and everything. It's kind of static. Things happen in it, but I didn't know how to describe them. So it might have been the worst telecast of wrestling ever in the history of mankind. Had a lot of fun doing it. The little things, Bernie Fiani, when we worked at Channel 12, was tremendous newsman. You know, one of the deacons of broadcasting here. But Bernie was a diminutive guy. So he always had the Manhattan telephone directory on his chair, and he'd sit so he could sit up high enough. Well, my old buddy Monty Pinker, who was working with me then, he now is co-owner of an advertising agency, but he took the telephone book. So there was Bernie, and it was political reports on election day, and there was Bernie with the desk up to here on him, trying to do it. He was fuming when he got off. But you know, tricks were always being played. Tricks were always being played. Broadcasting used to be a lot of fun. I think a lot of it has disappeared. You don't hear disc jockeys, and I was a guy who did a lot of one-liners. You don't hear that anymore. Basically now, they're great announcers and very famous people and everything. But in the old days, guys, young comics would start out on the radio and get their opportunity and then graduate to the clubs and then eventually hope to get on Carson. That's where so many broke in big time. But that's gone now. So now local television might revive itself by doing some local game shows or something of that nature. But it's difficult. Everything has changed, of course. We're all going through changes in life, and I used to use the 7-year plan. What were you at 14? What were you at 21? Think of all the changes that occurred in your life. And 21 to 28, how you developed. 28 to 35, etc., etc. Everything changed. Your income, your philosophy, everything. And you made yourself, you know, of what you had to do with it.
If there were a young person out there watching right now that 14, 15 years old wants to be an announcer, wants to be on television, what would you advise that person?
Well, I started out in high school. I used to do the noonday announcements, and that started during the lunch hours. So I would say, good morning, here are the afternoon announcements, which was kind of a misnomer. But I would read the announcements, and then I would always do at the end, think it over. And I would do a one-liner or some piece of advice, a philosophy, and enjoyed doing that. And I finally said, gee, I would like to try that. The first time I was at a radio station, and this is such an interesting story because my dad was working for Anaconda, the American brass company, and they were on strike. So he was in the office staff, he wasn't on strike. So they had, in the Hotel Statler in Buffalo, they had set up their offices. Well, WBEN, which was a premier station in Buffalo, had radio and TV. And I went in, they said, well, come over and watch the radio program. So I went in there, and there was a booth actually where spectators could sit and watch. And there was a guy on the air, and he had an engineer, and he talked, and they played records and everything. Well, his name was Bob Smith. He became Buffalo Bob Smith on TV with the Howdy Doody Show. Very famous man. But when I was looking at him, he was just a good announcer from Buffalo. Foster Brooks, who used to do a lot of drunk acts on TV, was a disc jockey in Buffalo. You know, you run across, that's where, again, a comedian can make it. I can remember Jack Parr getting a start on radio during the summer vacation for Jack Benny. Jack Parr would have a show on, I don't know if it was NBC or what network it was on. But that's what happened in the old days. Radio, when I grew up, was like television today. It was drama, comedies, it was programs. It wasn't music. There was music during the afternoon, but at night it was all radio shows. Inner Sanctum, Suspense, Gunsmoke, all those great shows and great comedians, Bob Hope, Jack Benny, Fred Allen, they all had radio shows. They converted into television as television got popular. And they became stars, of course, in television. Jack Benny, when I was a kid, I never realized that Jack Benny made movies. I see him on TV now every once in a while, but Jack Benny was a great radio star and a tremendous TV star. All of those people got their start doing radio shows. They probably got started in the Catskills, doing stand-up comedy in the Catskills. But it was a great time to grow up, as I said before. The 50s were innocent, a lot of fun. The 60s suddenly became drug-oriented, and it was less fun, I think. Kids today, I hope they have fun, but it's not the same. It's not the same. But that's the way the world evolves. Again, that's a 7-year process.
So you would think if a young person had that inclination,
if you want to be an announcer, one, it's not a necessity to go to college, but I would always suggest if you had the opportunity to go to college. I went to Ithaca, as I said, and I got great training there and everything. If you had the opportunity, go to college. It broadens your horizons. You learn so many other things other than how to be an announcer or a salesman or a writer or what have you. But try to get opportunities to do MC work. If you just have to do an MC work at a wedding or some carnival or whatever, get the experience in front of an audience and using a mic. Then gravitate. If you have a decent voice, and nowadays everybody had, hello there, this is Charlie Ritter. They all sounded like Dave Mitchell, but it is now the jocks are, they have human sounding voices, but they don't have the opportunity to be funny or anything else. But be yourself. That's the biggest thing you can do. If you try to be somebody else, it's not going to work. It'll grate on you. I used to steal lines from jocks in Buffalo that I would listen to. one of the ones was, and now live from New York State, you know, and then would introduce something. And Danny Neverett, who was a classic disc jockey, I think he's still working in Buffalo, but he says, "This is Danny Neverett looking at you through the hole in the record." Very vivid sounding thing. And I said that, I told this joke the other day at the inauguration ceremony. I said, it's the best one-liner I've heard this year. I was watching a football game. This actually happened. I was watching a football game, exhibition game for the Buffalo Bills in August. And a halfback breaks loose on a run. And a safety comes up behind him, grabs him by his shirt, and throws him on the ground. And the announcer says, "Gee, that looked like a second date." I laughed. The guy with him never cracked a joke or never smiled, never nothing. I said, how can you not react to that joke? It's a great one-liner. But again, my career was varied from being in the Army, learning something in the Army. As my uncle said, you know how to shoot a gun? No, they'll teach you. You know? I hope you don't have to, but they'll teach you.
Okay. It was lined up here. Did you have any final comments you'd like to make on this video?
Well, I've used this before. As I say to everybody, I'm at the age now where all I pray for is a good prune crop. Thanks for watching.
You must remember this, a kiss is still a kiss, a sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say I love you, on that you can rely. No matter what the future brings as time goes by.